furthest you've ever gone to get a laugh?
Honestly, nothing immediately comes to mind, and I think that is worse than if I had an embarrassing story, because I think that speaks to the degree to which my entire life has been one long kind of, effort to get that laugh. I think I talked about in the King of Comedy episode being the kind of unfunny class clown, the sort of self-appointed class clown. So it's not so much one moment that sticks out. It's kind of a 27-year-long plateau of trying and failing to get that laugh.
Josh, how about you?
My biggest laughs were always unintentional, and so it was always like everybody started laughing. I was like, "What are you guys laughing at?" Like in my head. So the furthest I've gone to get a laugh has never been successful. I have done things, I think, probably to try to acquire a laugh, but it was. Didn't happen, and for the most part, my biggest laughs come from when I'm like being sincere and not trying to be funny, and everybody just laughs at them.
Well, welcome to another episode of Split Picks. Today, we're going back a full century to discuss one of the greatest comedians who has ever graced the screen. It is Mr. Buster Keaton today. Buster was about as innovative behind the camera as he was in front of it, so we have a ton to talk about today. So, I'm once again being joined by Toother Bennett Glace. Bennett, how are you?
Hey, Craig. I'm doing pretty well. Excited to talk about Buster Keaton. I got to kind of dive into his work for basically the first time since college over the last couple of weeks, which has been great.
Yeah, and I watched a ton of these as well, and it's been a blast. But, Bennett, last month, you interviewed the actor and musician Joshua Burge. Turns out he is a Buster Keaton fan, so today we're bringing Josh on as our special guest. So Josh, how are you doing today?
Yeah, not bad for an old guy. Yeah, doing great. And thank you for having me, Bennett, Craig. Yeah, this is great to be here.
Yeah, glad this worked out, and yeah.
Happy to have you.
So, the films we're talking about today are The Cook from 1918 and Cops from 1922. So The Cook was not directed by Buster Keaton, but we felt this was a short worthy of discussion regardless because it shows Buster in an early supporting role. Josh, you selected this movie, so I'm curious what drew you to this one and why do you think it's worth talking about in the grand scheme of Buster Keaton's work?
Well, because of Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was largely the creator of it, but he also was a big supporter of Buster Keaton. And I don't want to get too much into Fatty Arbuckle's story. Anybody can go and watch that or read about it or, and learn about Fatty Arbuckle. But I thought that it was important to do because it showed their friendship that they had as creators, as comedians, as performers. I thought The Cook was a pretty good, the best, actually, semblance of that.
So now, Bennett, you selected Cops, which is a short from 1922. Why this one, and why are we talking about it today?
Well, if The Cook is a really great example of Buster in kind of a buddy comedy playing off another screen star, I thought Cops was a great example of Buster in more of a kind of solo man on a mission role. Cops kind of takes Buster's romantic mission to its kind of most elemental. It opens with him getting this ultimatum from the object of his affection and ends with, won't spoil the ending, but ends with kind of rejection taken to its logical extreme. And the chase on the way gets really surreal. And I don't know, like Cops are obviously in the news of late. And it's kind of it's funny to watch Buster Keaton get the best of hundreds and hundreds of police officers throughout the film's runtime.
So I think it's important just to kind of briefly talk about Buster's background, and I think we'll approach this episode in a little different format where instead of doing half and half on each, we're kind of just going to talk about both together at the same time. So Buster, he grew up on the vaudeville circuit quite literally. His parents were performers, and he was a star by the age of 5, but Roscoe Arbuckle was the first person to put Buster on camera, and Josh, it sounds like you probably have a better background of this than I do, but how do you feel about how their styles complement each other, and why do you think they work so well together for so many films.
Okay, well, first of all, I think it was just the sensibility of vaudeville at that time. I think translating into cinema was a new thing. We obviously take it for granted these days, of course, because it's been such a part of our lives through our existence. But back then, it was a new medium. So going from stage to camera was probably quite daunting in a lot of people's eyes, at that time. And I think Buster and Roscoe just probably hit it off. Like they just whatever, they had the same sensibilities that like this would play, and this wouldn't play. So let's not do that. And like that was kind of the way it worked. And I think that the Cook is a great example of that. I think.
So what do you think was kind of the key to their partnership?
Not to be but I'm sorry, it's fat guy, skinny guy.
Exactly.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was trying to dance around it for so long, and no, that's it. It's fat guy, skinny guy. Like that's it. Like that's hilarious. That was Laurel and Hardy. Those guys were so good at it, and they played off that.
Even if it is as simple as fat guy, skinny guy, there is something so profound in seeing a fat guy and skinny guy play off of each other. I mean, there's a reason that all of the famous comedy duos are mismatched in that way. I think also the film makes great use of their two different like faces, not just that one of them has a really fat round face and one of them has a really long kind of angular face, but the first shot we get of Fatty is him like crying. It sort of looks like he's peeling potatoes, but I have to assume the joke is that he's cutting onions and that's why he's crying. But like seeing Fatty so emotional like that compared to Buster, who we obviously associate with such a, stony, expressionless face, they play off of each other so wonderfully in that way too, in their expressions.
Agreed. Yeah, it is so funny. I mean, something that's so great is like, I mean, obviously, there's edits and everything, but how they play off of each other, like flipping the pans and flipping, like and then catching the consomme, like it's so silly, like because like consomme obviously would not stay in the dish, but like it's brilliant and it is funny and it was the humor in it is a big part of it is fat guy, skinny guy.
So it seems like in Buster's own, when he directs, he's not always the chaotic presence, but in the Cook, I feel like he kind of plays the troublemaker early on where he's, just kind of causing a bit of a ruckus. But I feel like in his films, he's often wrongly accused of being the troublemaker or put in a position where he has to restore order to the world around him. So I'm curious, what do you guys see as being the difference in these two films, how they use their comedy?
Well, that's a good point. He in the Cook, he is kind of the agent of chaos. He's both on the restaurant floor when he's kind of close talking with all the women, when he's kind of showing off his dance moves, and then when he's in kind of the back of the house, kind of getting in Fatty's way. Whereas in Cops, he's kind of a stand-in for anybody. He's kind of an every protagonist, and we're supposed to be kind of on his side. It's instead of a kind of a fun reversal there, and it's maybe reflective of the fact that he's a co-director on Cops and wants to depict himself in a slightly more heroic or admirable light.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I don't think he's intentionally being like antagonistic at all. I think it's just being silly. Like I've worked as in the middle of the house myself, and like I just know that like it feels like it's two different worlds between the front of the house, the back of the house, like and it's a really strange thing, and I don't think it was necessarily trying to cause trouble, but he does.
Yeah, antagonistic is maybe not the word I would use. I guess it's just more like he's introducing chaos into an ordered world in The Cook, and in Cops, he's a regular guy in a world that is chaotic, seemingly. He's the like wacky guy, the sort of like Jerry Lewis, Jim Carrey figure in The Cook, and he's some regular guy kind of plunked into a wacky situation in Cops, I guess is more how I see it.
Right, like you're not going to get a dance sequence breakout in Cops, but that is one thing I wanted to ask both of you about. Just seemingly out of nowhere, they just start dancing, and then it spreads from the front of the house to the back of the house, and I guess going off of that, like, do you guys have a favorite gag from this film? And
One thing that never failed to make me laugh was the fact that all of the food, particularly like the liquid food, no matter what it is coming out of the same big tub.
yes,
When he orders when she gets the coffee and it comes out of it, and then the brown soup that comes out of it. Brown soup is such a funny gag, and that whole thing reminded me of two jokes from The Simpsons. It reminded me of, there's a bit where they're going to buy shoes, and Marge rattles off, like, they need a good, sturdy shoe for funerals, weddings, visits to elderly relatives, blah, blah. And the guy goes, well, we have a brown shoe. And it also reminded me of when they go to the Duff Brewery, and, like, Duff Light, and Duff Dry are all coming out of the same tube into the same big bucket.
Yeah.
Reminded me of that gag, no matter how many times he goes back.
My grandfather used to always say, he's like, like, would you be eating ice cream or whatever? He's like, what do you mean this is better than the other one? And he's like, it all comes out of the same tank, like, and like that was like always the joke, like gasoline, whatever. It all comes out of the same tank. Like it was always the same thing, like, yeah, I love that, Bennett. Yeah, that's great.
What about you? Favorite bit or favorite gag from the movie?
I love the physicality of, like, flipping the pancakes and throwing, like, I know there's edits in there where, like, Buster caught the things, but, like, all that stuff. And then that's why I recommend The Cook more than anything. I think it's only historically profound. I don't think it's anything it's innately profound, like, in its film of itself.
I think it's about as good an intro as any. I think you could get to kind of their two sensibilities. I don't think I had ever actually seen. I was obviously familiar with Fatty Arbuckle. I was mostly, unfortunately, familiar with, like, the Scandal, which, again, I mean, if you guys want to read about it, there's plenty of podcasts, and even the Wikipedia page could probably do a better job of describing it than I can. But yeah, I was mostly familiar with him through that, and seeing the two of them on screen together, what a way, what an introduction to Fatty in particular. And I think if listeners are looking for an intro to one or both of these guys, you can't do much better than The Cook, kind of seeing them, literally throwing plates and stuff at each other.
Yeah, and it's sad. I mean, it's sad about Fatty Arbuckle because, regardless of what everybody's opinion is about that scandal, if you don't know about it, then read about it. That's fine. But it's like basically the first Hollywood scandal, and he wasn't convicted, but Buster continued to employ Roscoe, Fatty Arbuckle, for years after the horrible scandal that it was, like, whatever. And this is something about, like, that type of, like, friendship and meaningful relationship that you have with another artist or another human being that I think is pretty cool and important.
So, Josh, you mentioned in your recent interview with Bennett that's available now on Split Tooth that one of the keys to acting in comedy is just to never break. And Buster Keaton was the ultimate stone face. So I'm curious, what have you learned from Buster Keaton as an actor, and especially while doing comedy? Like, what do you take away from him?
Well, I think he used to like to break. There was a point in time where, like, he decided it just didn't look good, and he didn't want to do that anymore. So he became a stone face, and I feel that way as well, because, like, when people post photos of me or whatever, and, like, my teeth are showing and I'm smiling, like, I don't like it. I don't know, something about Buster Keaton must have resonated with him as well in that way. He decided my films would be better if I just don't laugh and smile, if I just stay this.
So now, Josh, I'm curious because you selected The Cook, and I'm sure you're asked about spaghetti a lot, but this features an amazing scene with four guys at a table eating spaghetti in increasingly strange ways. So I'm curious, what do you think makes spaghetti such a compelling comedic tool, and why didn't the silent stars ever use sauce?
Yeah, that's good. Well, I don't know why they didn't use sauce, but I now I'm thinking about whether they didn't use sauce. I think it's probably I'm assuming it just didn't play. That's just the way it was back then. I'm assuming it's why they didn't use sauce. Why I think spaghetti is funny? Because it's long, it's noodly, it's sloppy, it's totally gag worthy. Everything. The word itself, spaghetti, is hilarious. Like, it is such a funny word, and just everything about it is so funny, and I think that's why people have used it like over the years. Like I mean, it's like a funny bit, like when like a kindergartner, like a toddler says "Puschetti," and that's hilarious, and it's spaghetti, which is even more ridiculous. It's equally ridiculous. So it's so funny, that's probably all it comes down to.
It's got to be among the most photographed foodstuffs there is. Like when I think of famous eating scenes, there's like 5 famous spaghetti scenes that come to mind, and I don't know that you could say the same about other types of food.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's yeah. I don't know the top 5 stroganoff scenes.
That's a list waiting to happen.
I like too that it's introduced to the title card as Italy's national dish. So like it made me wonder, like, would audiences in 1918 have never seen spaghetti before? What an interesting thought.
Yeah, it is strange. Like, I mean, obviously, obviously people in Los Angeles, because it was shot in Los Angeles, but like New York, but like I don't know, like did people in Ohio know about spaghetti in 1918? I don't have any idea.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, maybe all of their wild ways to try and eat it were, maybe there's a kernel of reality to that. I mean, I personally like the guy who funnels it into his mouth. It's a good move. Also, Fatty cutting it up with the beaters. I'm not sure what that was intended to do.
Yeah.
I liked when Arbuckle wraps around his finger and then like does the ring pop and eats it that way. I thought that was efficient. So Josh, I asked this because for people who aren't familiar with your work, there's a scene in Buzzard where your character's eating spaghetti in bed, and it's a standout moment from the film. So I'm curious if you took some direct inspiration from this film.
Well, no, not necessarily, but I took direct inspiration from it in the way that I took direct inspiration from anybody that's ever put anything on film, which is just do it, man. Mm-hmm. You just do it. Like, don't worry about it. And so, like, it wasn't from this film in particular, but it was certainly Buster Keaton or Chaplin or the Marx Brothers, Paul Newman and Kool and Luke eating the eggs, and like, I mean, it was you just gotta do it. And like, we had one plate of spaghetti, and that was it. We had one take, so you just go for it and you just do it, and then see what happens. Is there something that's supposed to be more meaningful about it? I don't know.
No.
It really was just me eating a plate of spaghetti, dudes. I don't know what to say.
I just thought it was a funny coincidence that spaghetti turned up in this. Maybe the first instance of spaghetti in an American film, perhaps.
No, people like it. Like I heard a ghost story.
Oh, the pie, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of a similar scene, yeah.
Yeah, they were inspired by that spaghetti eating scene. That's crazy to me.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Well, no, because like we got into comparisons like Gummo, like the kid eats plate of spaghetti in the bathtub while drinking a glass of milk, which is like super disgusting in my opinion.
So horrifying.
With the bacon taped to the wall.
Yeah. So we weren't the first to do it, certainly, but like, whatever, that scene certainly does seem to strike a chord with people for whatever reason. I like spaghetti. I think it's weird when I eat spaghetti with my friends and they're like, they just look at me like
like say the line, Bart.
Yeah, I mean, like, hey, what's going on, everybody? Nothing. We just want to see you eat it, man. Okay, all right.
So another reason I asked this is because Buster Keaton often takes conventional items to unconventional places, and obviously he learned from Arbuckle, and I feel like he just took gag construction to another level in his own films. And this is evident in how both of these films end. So before we get into the end, so Bennett, why don't we talk a little bit about Cops? Do you want to give us a little background on Cops and what Buster's up to in this one?
Yeah, sure. It's about as simple as the story gets, really. We're introduced to Buster behind bars. It's not clear why at first. And he's being given an ultimatum by his object of affection. just call her unnamed female lead, says, I won't marry you until you're a big businessman or something to that effect. The camera zooms out.
Make something of yourself.
Until you make something of yourself. The camera zooms out. He's not, in fact, in jail, though he is perhaps in the jail of heartache. He's just behind the gates of a house, and he sets out to become a big businessman. He gets sort of I don't know what he gets hoodwinked by an unscrupulous fellow. Gets tricked into buying a bunch of like houseware. I don't know why he thought that buying a bunch of stuff was the key to proving he was a businessman, but he buys basically a bunch of furnishings and a horse, and is kind of riding through town, and eventually, kind of at the halfway point, incidentally, I think an anarchist throws a bomb into his vicinity, which he uses to light a cigarette, and then tosses into the police parade that's going on that day. So eventually the last like 10 minutes of the film are kind of one long chase with him and conceivably every cop in the state, kind of increasingly surreal stuff. And then it ends with him being turned down once again, and then effectively committing suicide by walking into a big warehouse full of angry police officers. And it has maybe the funniest like closing title card of any movie. It's just at the end, and his kind of flat brim pork pie hat on top of a tombstone.
So I asked about the ends because they do have a similar build up, and I think it's important how in Cops Bennett, like you mentioned, it ends with just the single title card. I think the important thing here, though, is that once Buster Keaton was directing films on his own, he would just build jokes until they could go no further. And I think Cops is the perfect ending for that film, because where else can that go, you know?
Yeah. But yeah, I think both films reach kind of apocalyptic stakes, even if that apocalypse is just sort of on like a personal level. They both end with, in the case of the cook, they're both, in the ocean. In the case of Cops, he's presumably dead. And then I think in most of his features, even the shorts, there's always some sort of explosion. There's always something getting hit by a train. The general obviously has the most expensive shot in the history of silent film. 1 week, their house gets hit by a train at the end. There's always some sort of big explosion, big sort of cataclysm. And I think, that speaks to the degree to which he built gags up until they couldn't go any farther. I don't know. He really does that better than just about anybody. I think Jacques Tati is his only rival. I think in playtime, when the kind of restaurant falls apart around them, is the closest anybody's got, I think, in sound film to doing the sort of stuff that Buster Keaton does.
Yeah, I agree. That's completely correct. I think that probably was just not even just the nature of filmmaking in the silent era, but I mean, what else are you gonna do? Like, you're gonna make the biggest splash you can, but as much as that is true, like, how do you get to that point is like insane, and so like how he delivered, like how he developed like any of these bits like over his career, like, it's just insane to think about getting to that point where like we can take anything for granted nowadays. Like, we can talk about CGI and digital anything, but back then, I mean, it was just we got to do this on this film medium, which is just 24 frames a second run through this camera, and we have to set this up and time it precisely. And I think that's where the Buster Keaton genius lies.
Right, and hopefully nobody's maimed or killed along the way. I mean, it's possibly apocryphal, but one of the anecdotes you always hear is that he directed his team to keep shooting until he called cut or was killed. I don't know. Speaking of the gag construction again, I don't know how you like watch the films, but for me, like I find myself in the shorts, especially like looking around the frame, especially something like The Cook that's just on a couple of sets and almost moves on one plane. I find myself looking around the frames at every object going, oh, what is he going to do with that? Oh, what's he going to do with that? Like seeing stuff like the guy playing the cello, like, oh, that cello is going to get involved in a gag. I think that's one of like the great pleasures of watching these, is watching the shorts, is kind of trying to outthink Buster. And the gag is always funnier than you imagine it's going to be. He always comes up with something more creative than you could possibly come up with, armed with, a chair or whatever. Incredible stuff. Genius doesn't even say it. so many things like surprise you in learning about Keaton. One thing that totally didn't surprise me was that he described like in getting into filmmaking, like the first thing he did, the first thing he felt like he needed to do was like to take the camera apart and like the film strip and get it in his hands and like really understand like the mechanism. And that it comes across in the films. He understands the like mechanical and material reality of the film, of like the whole film apparatus, I think, in ways that like even Chaplin doesn't. Like the chase at the end of Sherlock Jr. being the best example, but even something like 1 Week, his first short, there's a sequence where his wife is like taking a bath and she drops her bar of soap outside, and you see a hand come in front of the camera to like obscure her while she reaches for the soap. Like little like meta jokes like that. You don't see anything like that from his contemporaries, not that I'm aware of, at least.
Yeah, well, I mean, not to talk shit about Chaplin, but like he played up to like a broader standard of like what entertainment was then, and I don't think Keaton was doing that. I think Keaton was doing. I think you put it pretty well. He was a tinkerer.
Yeah, I mean, I think as much as he was like pulling from the same bag of tricks that he used on the stage, as much as like stagecraft informed his acting style, I don't like his acting on screen doesn't seem necessarily like an extension of the theater the way it does for Chaplin. He really seems like he's embracing a totally new tool or a totally new toy that he can tinker with when he's on the stage. Which, again, yeah, I mean, not to shit on Chaplin, who is obviously a genius, and like City Lights and the Gold Rush are, you know, immaculate and, you know, live in eternity for a reason, but Keaton is more interesting to me for that like sense of like curiousness and invention. Curiousness is not a word. That sense of curiosity and invention.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. You know, like I think Chaplin is great, but like I think somebody wrote, I don't know, Craig or Bennett, if I don't remember who it was, but like they wrote like Chaplin hits an emotional string harder than Keaton does, and I agree with that. And like Keaton does not do that. Like Keaton is for the bit in the moment and like take it for face value. And Chaplin wrote the song "Smile." You know?
That's I was actually just listening. I haven't seen the Bogdanovich documentary, but I was listening to an interview between Bogdanovich and Chuck Workman about it. And one of the things Bogdanovich says has helped, like why he thinks Keaton stands up better than Chaplin is like the lack of sentimentality in Keaton's work. And I love sentimental stuff. I was just watching John Ford's The Long Gray Line, bawling my eyes out, and that's a movie that really enmeshes, you know, sentimentality and existentialism really well. But because of Chaplin, people can tend to associate silent films with sentimentality, and I like going to Keaton and seeing the kind of rigorous lack of sentimentality. An ending that's as much of a gut punch but still very funny as the ending of Cops. You know, I appreciate that in Keaton, that stone-facedness comes across in, you know, the screenplays and in the direction of his films.
Yeah. And also, that's this thing I wanted to discuss with you guys, you know, when we were exchanging documents and whatever. You guys both mentioned, like, when you first met Keaton or Chaplin or whatever, like in film, like in your living room or whatever. And like, in my brain, I can't really separate silent film from black and white film. Like, it's kind of crazy. Like, sound, like, doesn't, like, the Marx Brothers and Chaplin and Keaton, like they're all kind of the same category to me, and versus color talkies.
Mm-hmm. See, weirdly, Keaton is the one that occupies a separate space for me. I would think of like the Marx Brothers and Chaplin as basically occupying the same era. Like I was definitely introduced to them from like my grandparents. But yeah, like I mentioned, I had never heard of Buster Keaton until that AFI 10th anniversary list when The General, which had not been on the previous list, came in at number 18. And my understanding of Keaton's legacy is that he was sort of reappraised in the 60s. I know Saris in his kind of capsule on him talks about the reappraisal that's going on kind of contemporaneously with him. But I thought that was really interesting that seemingly between 1998 and 2008, at least the people at AFI remembered who Buster Keaton was. So you were introduced to him, I guess, like around the same time as you would have been introduced to Chaplin.
I mean, yeah, not just Buster Keaton, Harry Langdon, Harry Lloyd, yeah, like all the even the silent R gang comedies and like I was just like that was all came about like around the same time when I was really young, and then like as I've gotten deeper into it, like like people are just like, wait, you look like Buster Keaton. I'm like, yeah, I know, but like they're like, well, you guys should make a movie. And I was like, well, I've been thinking about it since like 2005 because my buddy like he brought this image, whatever. It's a ridiculous story, but he brought this image and I was like, yeah, I'd rather prefer somebody else did the story, because I don't think I'm gonna be that good at telling it, And Langdon, Lloyd, Laurel and Hardy, they were silent. Like people don't remember that Laurel and Hardy started out as silent actors, and Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, our gang comedies, Keystone Cops. But in my brain, like I don't really. I was like, oh, these are black and white movies, and they just decided not to use sound like that. And when I was a kid, like that was the thought process I had, which is ridiculous. Like they just didn't have sound, but I didn't understand technology and all that stuff. So like Buster Keaton, like he was not separate from anything else. Like I just knew about all those people because I used to just go to the library and read about the old time actors. Like, cause I thought it was more interesting than whatever was going on in 1988 on television. So like I liked it more.
So I think this would be a good point to mention that just, from 1920 to 1928, Buster Keaton had Buster Keaton Studio, and he made 10 features and 19 shorts there in that time. I mean, it's pretty consensus is that was his greatest period, but I'm curious, what are your personal favorite Keaton films and why?
I just revisited it earlier this week for this conversation. I think Sherlock Jr. would probably be number one for me. I mean, you can't beat the General for just the sheer ambition and how the hilarity of some of those gags, but the ending chase in Sherlock Jr. When he's going into the different movie scenes, just incredible stuff. It's like Buster Keaton doing postmodernism at a time when like the term modernism was being coined, or was about to be coined. Really just incredible stuff. And it holds up today better than like most action movies or comedies, let alone action comedies.
Josh, what about you? Do you have a favorite Keaton?
Yeah, Sherlock Jr.'s the General.
I'll say another one that I like that he didn't direct it, but I would highly recommend checking out is Buster Keaton Rides Again, is a National Film Board of Canada documentary about kind of the making of his last short that he co-directed. It's just really incredible, both if you're looking for just kind of like the cliff notes of Buster Keaton's biography and all sorts of behind the scenes of an old Buster Keaton directing gags and kind of getting in a fight with the director over a gag and playing the ukulele. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I did watch it. It's a fun watch.
Isn't it great?
Yeah. Did you guys ever see that interview that he did when he was like just at his house and like he was with his wife towards the end of his life?
No.
I don't think so. No, I saw his episode of This Is Your Life, but I've never seen an interview from his house.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, and he hates the biography that was made about him in 1958 really? Or whatever. Like he hated it, and that was kind of the reason I was like, man, we should give this guy a good biography. I'm not probably the person to do it, but like I think someone should, But no, he does this. He has this whole video, and he's just like, "Oh, we're gonna have dinner. I'll wash my hands, and maybe after dinner we can play bridge. What do you think about that? And like, and it's like he's Buster Keaton, man. He's like, yeah, I don't care about my life. I just want to hang out with my wife and play bridge, and I'm glad you came over to my place, and with your cameras and everything. But yeah, I'm just gonna hang out. We're gonna have dinner, and I'm gonna play bridge later, and
it's the life.
So we can all think about like him as much as we want to, but like he was just legitimately just like this real dude, like just doing this thing. He's like, this made sense to me in my brain. I was in vaudeville. My parents were in vaudeville. I was in. Now there's this thing called cameras. Now there's a thing called talkies. So I'm fucked and like whatever. And in the 1960s, he was just in his apartment or in his house, whatever, playing bridge with his wife.
His regular guyness is another thing I like about him. Not to like say that you have to pick one or the other, but like compared to Chaplin, who I always see as more of kind of like an artiste and like an intellectual, versus Keaton, who is just like he's just like a regular guy who like happened to be a genius for like the gag and happened to be able to like learn how to become a genius at like film directing. I don't know. He just liked baseball, like playing bridge. Never lost the spirit of the vaudeville stage. You know, I admire that about him. And it's maybe a little bit of American exceptionalism on my part. I don't know. I sort of resent Chaplin coming across the Atlantic and trying to beat us at our own game.
I actually agree with that. I think it is probably American exceptionalism and my part as well. And Chaplin's British, and
what gives him the right?
yeah. But I mean, Johnny Knoxville's ripped off Buster Keaton's gags, and like they made a multi-million-dollar fortune off of Jackass, and I don't know. It'd be nice if somebody just like gave a little nod here and there, but not that Keaton loved it, but he wouldn't want that at all. Like he would just want to make trains in his backyard, you know.
One thing we've mentioned is that, you know, Buster was great with gags and everything, but he also used the camera in ways that few other people were doing at the time. Bennett, do you maybe have any favorite instances that kind of give an example of how Buster was just innovative with the camera as well as just with the gags?
Well, I think those two instances that I mentioned from 1 Week and Sherlock Jr. are a great example. There's also one that Sarah singles out in the American cinema from The General, where he's hiding under a table, and one of the guys who's sitting around the table burns a hole in the tablecloth with his cigar, and we see Buster kind of upside down, looks at kind of his object of affection through the hole in the tablecloth. That's sort of like makeshift iris effect was something that I don't think anybody was doing around that time, and it's like a 3-second shot. You know, Buster does nothing to really like draw attention to it, but it's a subtler version, I think, of the sort of like inventive stuff we see from him in stuff like Sherlock Jr. or even an early short like 1 Week.
Josh, do you have any favorite Buster camera work moments?
No, not really. But like, no, I just think like his stunts and his physicality is like it was most exceptional about that time period. Off the top of my head, like we talked about Cops, like I would say like it's insane. Like that like a car drove by and he grabbed a hold of it and it went horizontal. I think that's ultimately one of the greatest bits of all time.
And again, it's almost like a transitional gag. He doesn't rest on that. Like it just happens.
Yeah, it moves on to the next scene, no problem. Like, they don't even address it further. That's it. It just goes on to the next scene. Like, yeah, that's what a great gag should be.
Whereas, like, if that was a joke in a comedy today, it'd be in the trailer, and we'd all know it.
Yeah. And the poster, you know, like a POV shot, it's like, you know, like, yeah, it'd be silly. Yeah.
Well, I think the crazy thing about that gag especially is that the only places I've really seen that done is in cartoons. Like, Buster did that in real life.
Right.
And it's crazy. He predates like the Looney Tunes. Like so much of this, like we think of as being like elemental gags that like, you know, we would have seen on like cartoons, but like he's like 10 years ahead of that. 20 years.
Ahead of his time is putting it lightly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a weird thing to talk about too. And it's why I have such a hard time talking about it. It's like probably like a lot of like depression and mental health issues going on with him. Like that's not funny at all. I'm not trying to laugh, but like he did have that, and he was just like, "Screw it, I'm just gonna do this. I don't care."
There's a sense of fatalism to the "I'm willing to die" on camera, and I mean his only anything close like a peer today, I would say, is probably like Tom Cruise, a man who I'm convinced is gonna keep making Mission Impossible sequences until they've captured his death on camera.
So you're probably right, Bennett. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that fatalism comes across. I think in his famous essay, James Agee talks about the melancholy in the Keaton persona. And again, I think what's so great about the stone-facedness is that he doesn't like underline that melancholy.
Well, yeah, it was Steamboat Bill when the famous thing fell on, the house fell on him or whatever. He said, he was like, yeah, I just signed out with MGM. I gave up my studio and my wife is divorcing me and everything. He's like, I didn't care, man. Because that thing fell on me and broke my neck and killed me. Like, I'd be fine with that. And it didn't happen. But like now we have this great stunt now. And like, Jackass and Johnny Knoxville and The Simpsons and Family Guy and whoever does this bit over and over again because this one dude's depression and like lack of enjoyment of life, like he just went ahead with his gag. Like it's so bizarre to think about.
It's one of the funnier because it's a gag he does in a couple of films. In the Haunted House, there's like actors who are on stage doing a version, or I think they're on stage and there's a house like set behind them, and the house set actually falls on one of the actors. So it's funny to see him do almost like an in joke at his own expense in his films. I don't know. Even if he didn't break on camera, he was obviously a funny guy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I never knew him, but like I've watched the documentary. It's like he seems like a nice enough guy. I don't know if he was a funny guy in real life. It seems like kind of a jerk, but like I love that. I'm a kind of a jerk, and I think I would get along with him quite well. And we're both Michigan guys, and I just think that I don't know. It must have been really tough for him to like be one of the biggest stars, rivaling Chaplin. And then like this new technology came along called the talkies, and you don't have a life anymore, man. Like that must have been really, really hard, man.
Well, I think it's another reason he appeals so much. It's such like it's like an elemental story that you can't help but like sympathize with. You know, the having nothing, having everything, having nothing, clawing to get some of it back is it's such an appealing story. And he embodies it more than almost anybody in Hollywood history.
Yeah. Yeah. And just coming to peace with the fact that you live in a little house with your wife and play bridge.
So I just have two more questions for you guys. But Josh, you've mentioned he joined MGM. That was in 1928. He later called it the worst mistake of his life. He lost control of his films. You know, we've mentioned that he fell from the public conscience. He struggled with alcoholism. He got divorced. He lost all of his money. Why do you think the studios were unable to use Buster to his full abilities? Because I've heard pretty much The Cameraman was his last great film from everything I've read. I haven't seen any of those films from that period myself, but what was going on there?
I don't think the studios are smart. I still think they're smart. They're a business, and they're not artistic at all, and they are inherently flawed. I still feel that to this day, even though that was 1928 when he signed with MGM. Am I right?
28. Yeah, I think The Cameraman was 28 or 29.
To this day, man, I don't think that the studios are doing it well. They haven't really like made an effort to like deviate or to be creative about how to approach 21st century Hollywood. And like this like a little embarrassing. So like Buster was pissed off about it. The Marx Brothers are pissed off about it. Like fucking Chaplin was pissed off about it. Douglas Fairbanks was pissed off. That's why they created UA. All the UA institutions are like gone. They don't even exist anymore in Los Angeles. Like it's so what do we got? YouTube people, right. Like that was going on.
YouTube and TikTok.
Jake Paul. Jake Paul's gonna fight somebody.
He's the only independent creator left.
Paul fight somebody.
There's maybe an essay somewhere in there about how the Paul brothers are the last two auteurs, something like that. It's true though. It's amazing though the degree to which nothing has changed. I mean, Buster Keaton in 1928, we see the same story as we've seen with like just about every other artist who's ceded any degree of control to studio powers. What makes their work interesting gets squeezed out, and they become miserable. You know, they did it to Elaine May. They obviously did it to Orson Welles, and they did it to Zack Snyder, folks.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're not wrong, man. Like, I mean, from what I hear, Zach's a nice enough guy.
Seems like it, yeah. The studios, man, they're not any artist's friend. But yeah, I mean, it is why they founded UA, and I think Chaplin even told Keaton. He said it's like the worst mistake you could possibly make, leaving UA and going to MGM.
Yeah, he did tell him that. Keaton was broke at the time. He didn't really have any options. He was getting sued, and he was trying to back up Roscoe and fight. It was a mess.
I mean, I honestly think that like when Clint Eastwood dies, we'll have lost like the last studio director who has any sort of artistic control. He is literally like the last studio auteur.
Yeah.
That leads to my final question, Will, I think. So in The Cook, you know, essentially they save the girl and they chase the tough guy away. The gags kind of lead to them becoming heroes. But in Cops, Buster does many heroic acts, but he still loses the girl, and it is not a happy ending. In his later films, he often gets the girl, but there's an overbearing sense of limitation to all of his characters. Even when he accomplishes the heroic, his films rarely end in triumph. Can you both talk a bit about the Keaton worldview and how he makes comedy out of limitation and ultimately failure?
Yeah, I think Gilberto Perez in The Material Ghost says something along the lines of how the tramp is always kind of in his own way an aristocrat, but the Keaton character is this kind of outsider who endeavors to, by whatever means possible, become whatever he needs to become to succeed in a world that is kind of moving around him. He's a lone guy in kind of a mechanical world. You know, it's interesting that we associate Keaton or Chaplin with being fed through gears, because I think Keaton is the one who actually sets his films in a kind of like mechanistic world. His is the character who often feels like he's kind of being like fed through gears, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. Ben, you nailed it, man. And but there's also a thing like, what is the Chaplin film where, you know, he's like kicking rocks out of his stone, like sitting next to a girlfriend of his. He's like, "Don't cry, we're gonna make it." And then Smile plays in the background, and then they walk down the road. That type of optimism is not in Keaton's films, and for whatever reason, I don't know, but like I like that for a reason, because like I just don't have optimism in my life. Like I because I'm from the Midwest or whatever. Like it's things aren't enjoyable. Like people hurt and people die, and so Chaplin's very delightful about like, well, things are going to be okay. We can be lovely and delightful and do these things. And like, I'm like, yeah, but that's not really how it goes, you know?
It's been a while since I've seen any Chaplin, honestly, which I should probably rectify at some point. But yeah, no, I like the lack of optimism and sentimentality in Keaton's endings. And I like that besides something like Cops that quite literally ends with him, you know, probably being beaten to death, there's not like a sense of finality. It's not like quite despairing. It's just sort of like an ambiguous life goes on, like the ending of The General, him kind of riding off on the, I don't know, whatever you call that, the piece on a locomotive that holds the wheels together, when he's kind of riding off on that bar by himself. I feel like that's almost like, it reminds me of like the ending of like The Graduate or something. It's this sort of like ambiguous, like kind of victory.
No, yeah, they don't know if they made the right decision or not.
Yeah, like, you know, Keaton is in a world where like, oh, I guess I made the right decision. I've won based on the standards set out at the beginning of this movie, but like at what cost? And like, was the girl I was chasing that great to begin with? Because after all, she was insistent I become an athlete or a Confederate soldier or whatever.
It was modern times,
businessman.
Modern times, yeah.
So do you guys feel that Chaplin's optimism might be part of the reason why he's more publicly favored, I guess is the way to phrase it? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely, Craig. There's no doubt in my brain. Like, that's why he is, like, ultimately favored over Harry Langdon or Harold Lloyd or Buster Keaton or Michael Jackson did a cover of Smile, right? Like, he was the biggest pop star of all time. Like, right? It was because of Chaplin, like, absolutely. I think because of his direct, like, emotional attachment to, like, his work was bigger than anything else. And, like, that made a difference in filmmaking in general as time went on, that we'd all understand that, okay, yeah, we can attach emotions to filmmaking. So Wizard of Oz or Citizen Kane or whatever, anything that came after, we just, it was understood, like, oh, it's because of Chaplin, because of Modern Times or City Lights or whatever. It doesn't matter. Like, it was understandable that the emotion was transferred through this medium called film.
Yeah, I think his emotional availability goes a long way. Although I find that the kind of stoicism, the stone-facedness of Keaton makes him easier to relate to. I'm gonna get both the name of the book and the author wrong, but I think it's Scott McCloud, and I think the book is called Understanding Comics, when he talks about the reason, like, the most popular and most, like, easy to relate to comic characters tend to be drawn so simply is because then you can mask them, you can sort of put your own face onto them and your own experience and whatever. It's why, like, Tintin works, and he wouldn't work if his face looked like you or mine. I like that in the Keaton movies, it's sort of easy to imagine yourself in the role, or easier. There's so much business to the Chaplin character. There's, you can suggest him with the mustache and the bowler, but really it's the pants and the walk and everything. Whereas Keaton, it's really just the expression in the hat. If I took my notebook and I drew, like, a horizontal line and then just drew one vertical line standing, you might almost describe that line as, like, Keaton-esque, because Keaton, something of the persona is literally just like a single figure and blank space. Everybody is Keaton in a sense. I don't know. In watching the movies, so I don't know. Even though Chaplin on the surface has that more kind of naked emotional appeal, and, like, has certainly to popular audiences had that more emotional appeal, I don't know. I guess Keaton hits me more on the gut level in that emotional way for that reason.
All right, well, I think that's probably a good place to start wrapping up. So to end the episode.
Oh, we didn't get to talk about goat glands.
Okay, Josh, you mentioned something before we started recording. This is a joke that went over my head. It was the type of thing where it's like, I know there's a joke there that I just don't get. So Buster in Cops has a horse, and they stop outside of a place that says Goat Gland Specialist. Do you want to give us a little breakdown of what this is? Because the history you gave us earlier was absolutely hilarious. So,
all right. So, like, when I saw Cops when I was a kid, like, I was like, okay, it's not a goat, it's a horse. So the goat gland, that must be the joke, right? Like, no. It turns out there's this doctor who moved to Los Angeles and became a goat gland specialist, like, right after the pandemic of 1918. And as you know, I don't know if you guys know, like, we're in a pandemic right now. But anyway, this guy came out here and he was like, nobody wants to have sex. Nobody's, like, having babies anymore. Like, what if I sewed goat glands into the testicles of a male? And if that doesn't work, then I can sew them into the uterus of a female. And this person's name is Dr. J.R. Brinkley. He was a doctor, and it became such a huge hit in Hollywood in the late teens, early 20s. And it was a goat gland. He was a goat gland specialist. He was the goat gland specialist. And so that was the joke in Cops of Buster Keaton's. Like, if we were in 1922, like, we would have gotten that bit. Like, we're not. So silent movies were, like, not funny or entertaining to people in the late 20s and early 30s. So they adapted, like, they tape audio tracks to the side of the tape to sell movies, but that would be called goat glanding. Like, yes, silent movies aren't interesting anymore. So like, we're gonna call them goat glanning and whatever. Yeah. Well, Richard Linklater is working on a movie right now with Robert Downey Jr. as being the star. Is going to play the Doctor J.R. Brinkley as the goat glanning dude. So like everything's great. And
it's funny because like in watching the films, I was like, wow, there's really nothing in these films that you couldn't like. You could show somebody these today, and they'd still laugh. Everything is still so funny, but. That is one joke that is very much lost in translation. A joke that probably made sense to audiences living in 1922 through like 1925, and then thereafter made sense to absolutely no one. Unless
yeah, that's right, man. So like I saw that, I saw it, and it's like, man, I always thought it was like, oh, it's a horse, it's not a goat, so that must be the joke. And I was like, wait, there's probably something more to it than that, and it turns out there's a lot more to it than that. And yeah, man, no, it's fascinating, right? You know, it's crazy.
Just imagining like a 1922 father having to like explain that joke to their child, but like they might not have had to because the child probably also was familiar with the concept of goat gland specialists.
God, I think we can only look forward to the experimental surgeries that'll be coming up after this pandemic now. Well, do either of you guys have any either final questions or thoughts about Buster Keaton before we wrap it up?
Folks, I would just say, you know, if you're a listener, I mean, obviously, I think if you're listening to the podcast on Split Tooth, you're hopefully something of a film fan. But I don't know if you're maybe unfamiliar with silent cinema, if you're unfamiliar even with black and white cinema. There's really not much of a better starting point than the shorts and features made by Buster Keaton. Besides the occasional joke about goat glands, and I'll be honest, yeah, I mean, occasionally in the shorts you're gonna run into some racial humor that hasn't aged especially well. Other than that, you're really gonna find comedy that hits just as hard as it presumably did around 100 years ago.
All right, well, Bennett, as always, thank you for joining me, and Josh, it's been so great to finally meet you. And if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, Bennett and Josh had a really amazing interview. It's available on the site now. I mean, it's a lot of fun to read. So that's our Buster Keaton talk. There's more split picks coming soon. We're not sure which one will be next, so keep an eye out. Synesthesia is coming back shortly. The Art House Drive-In will be back in probably a few weeks. So I'm Craig Wright, and Bennett, Josh, thank you again. We'll have more coming soon.
I like to think of myself as the Buster Keaton of podcasting.